Welcome, everyone. This is Michael Morris, and I'm so pleased so many of you from across the country have joined us today. This is a webinar on WIOA Final Rule, Title I, from a disability perspective. This webinar will certainly, I hope, answer questions that you have, reinforce information you already have been receiving from many different outlets. But most importantly, during this week, which we celebrated the 26th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's an extraordinary time to look at the workforce development system as it begins its implementation from a disability perspective. Before I introduce to you the wonderful lineup that we have to talk with you today, let me turn it back to Brittany Taylor for some of the logistical points to help you effectively participate.
Good afternoon, everyone. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the audio broadcast panel, and if you accidentally close this panel, you can reopen it easily by just going to the Communicate menu at the top of the screen and choose Join Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer, or if you prefer to listen by phone, dialing the phone numbers you see on the right, either 1-415-655-0001 or our toll-free number 855-749-4750. Today's meeting code that you'll enter is 665-743-965, and please note that you do not need to enter an attendee ID. Real-time captioning is being provided during this webinar. The captions can be found in the Media Viewer panel, which appears in the lower right corner of the webinar platform. If you want to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can minimize other panels like chat, Q&A, and/or participants. Submitting questions for Q&A. Please use the Q&A box to submit any questions you have during the webinar portion, and we will direct the questions accordingly during the Q&A portion of our webinar. Please use the Q&A portion and not the chat box for the most efficient streamline of questions. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you may also ask questions by emailing me directly at btaylor@ndi-inc.org. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and all materials will be placed on the Lead Center website at the link you see below. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to send a message to the host, which is myself, Brittany Taylor, or you can also email me at my email address again listed here. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael Morris and begin the content portion of the webinar.
Thank you, Brittany. Today's webinar is brought to you by the National Center on Leadership for the Employment and Economic Advancement of People with Disabilities, or better known as the LEAD Center. It's a collaborative of disability, workforce, and economic empowerment organizations led by the National Disability Institute with funding from the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or perhaps better known as ODEP. We're in our fourth year of funding. Many of you have joined us for webinars before. We brought you our first series on WIOA from a disability perspective when the notice of proposed rulemaking first came out, and we're glad to be able to bring you this webinar today, which is about clearly advancing employment opportunity, employment and economic self-sufficiency outcomes for individuals with disabilities across the country. The LEAD Center mission is to advance sustainable and individual and systems-level change that results in improved, competitive, integrated employment and economic self-sufficiency outcomes for individuals across the spectrum of disabilities. Our agenda today is to first review what we believe will be the webinar outcomes for all of you, and then take us inside WIOA, first by setting a context, looking at some of the highlights from the WIOA Title I Final Rule, looking at WIOA from a disability perspective across areas of interest, and then turning to an outstanding panel with representatives from the U.S. Department of Labor and the U.S. Department of Education, and then two individual leaders that represent the workforce development system. After hearing brief presentations from our panel members, I will begin with a set of questions which have been pre-prepared, and we also, as was just mentioned, encourage you to submit questions in the chat box. We will intersperse your questions among the prepared questions, and hopefully by the end of this hour and a half, we all will have a deeper understanding of the opportunities of WIOA Title I to meet the needs of individuals with disabilities, youth, as well as working age adults. So with that, let me introduce you to our panel. I'll say a little bit more about each of these panel members when we provide them their turn to make a presentation. But first is Christopher Button, who is the supervisor, the Workforce Systems Policy Team, Office of Disability Employment Policy, U.S. Department of Labor. Next, we will have Kimberly Vitelli, or Kim Vitelli, Deputy Administrator, Office of Workforce Investment, Employment and Training Administration, U.S. Department of Labor. Kim will be followed by Sue Rankin-White, Program Advisor, Office of the Commissioner, Rehabilitation Services Administration, RSA, U.S. Department of Education. Sue will be followed by Heidi Silver-Pecula, Branch Chief, Applied Innovation and Improvement Team, Division of Adult Education and Literacy, Office of Career, Technical and Adult Education, or better known as OCTE, U.S. Department of Education. And then our two outside speakers outside of government, Julie Squire, Policy Director at NASWA, the National Association of State Workforce Agencies, followed by Bridget Brown, Executive Director of the National Association of Workforce Development Professionals. So, quite a outstanding panel of leaders. But before we turn to them, I want to provide a brief overview of some highlights from the final rule implementing Title I of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. As I think we all know, on July 22nd, 2014, President Obama signed into law Public Law Number 113-128, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That was not, that day might have been a simple process for the stroke of a pen, but many of us followed for years the efforts in Congress to reauthorize what was the prior law and really change, make major changes to what prior to WIOA was WIA, the Workforce Investment Act. Title I of WIOA reaffirms the role of a customer-focused one-stop delivery system, a cornerstone of the public workforce development system, soon to be known across the country as American Job Centers. It is a system that is about improving and increasing coordination among key employment, education, and training programs. On June 30th, 2016, the Departments of Labor and Education issued a joint final rule to implement jointly administered activities authorized under Title I of WIOA. This joint final rule provides guidance for states and local workforce development systems that increase the skill and critical attainment, employment, retention, and earnings of participants, especially those with significant barriers to employment. Within the definition of those with significant barriers to employment, it includes individuals with disabilities. Title I, Workforce Development, and Title III, Wagner-Peiser of WIOA, published or have final rules that are in pre-publication. They're publicly available but have not yet appeared in the Federal Register. Title I of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, as amended by Title IV of WIOA, also have pre-published, publicly available final rules. Pending final rule publication is the rules regarding Section 188 of WIOA, which is focused on the implementation of the non-discrimination and equal opportunity portions of the law. The notice of proposed rulemaking regarding Section 188 were first issued on January 26, 2016. Now, we could try, but we will not try to cover all the final rules. We are focused on Title I. And I know, as we have done previously with webinars from the LEAD Center, I am sure we will have other webinars which will take up other facets of WIOA. But today is very much focused on Title I, and I want to review with you a few of the key and core components, particularly from a disability perspective. The first is, and a part that many of us, whether you work inside the workforce development system, you're an education agency, you're one of the other partners, vocational rehabilitation, adult education, or other mandated partners. The first bit of business was the development of unified and combined state plans, which provide the framework for states to outline a strategic vision of and goals for how the workforce development system will achieve the purposes of the law, with an absolute major emphasis on cross-system collaboration. The plans serve as four-year action plans to develop, align, and integrate state systems and provide a platform to achieve a state's vision and strategic and operational goals. Now, as we move from the planning stage, because all plans have been submitted, and to my understanding, although we can have some further comment from our federal panelists, all plans have been approved. Some plans have gone back with additional questions and additional information which needs to flow from the states. Those plans are plans that have been approved by both the Department of Education and RSA, as well as the Department of Labor, regarding this combined effort, this unified look at vision as well as strategic and operational approaches. A next part, which is certainly a key part of the final rule, is about performance accountability. Section 116 of WIOA establishes performance accountability indicators and performance reporting requirements to assess the effectiveness of workforce development systems from a state level and a local level in achieving positive outcomes for youth and adults with and without disabilities. The state performance report, which will be submitted annually, will be using a template that both departments will disseminate and will provide at a minimum information on actual performance levels achieved with respect to the specific performance indicators, again, for individuals with and without disabilities. Information expected in the state performance reports includes the total number of participants served, total number of participants who exit core programs, including, and this is very important from a disability perspective, a disaggregated accounting of those who participated in and really began to overcome barriers to employment. That includes individuals with disabilities. The information on performance levels achieved for the primary indicators of performance for all core programs include disaggregated levels for, among others, individuals with barriers to employment. That's people of low income. That includes as well people with disabilities and other core subgroups that meet this definition of individuals with barriers to employment. The average cost per participant for those participants who receive career and training services, respectively, during the most recent program year and the preceding program years for as applicable to the program. So really, for the first time, yes, we're going to get that big picture, and that was a part of the law before, but we're going to see disaggregated data that really looks at, and for the first time will give us a much closer, more specific view of how many people with disabilities are receiving services, what types of services are they receiving, what are the outcomes from receiving those services. That's data that was not previously collected. Another major area of the final rule is about AJC, American Job Center, accessibility certification. All comprehensive one-stop centers must be certified at least once every 3 years for physical and programmatic accessibility for individuals with disabilities. And much of this will come with further clarity in the publication of final rules for Section 188. What we do know about accessibility certification, excuse me, in the final rule is the actions include but are not limited to providing reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities, making reasonable modifications to policies, practices, and procedures where necessary to avoid discrimination against persons with disabilities, administering programs in the most integrated setting appropriate, how communication is taking place with people with disabilities as effectively as those with others without disabilities, providing appropriate auxiliary aids and services, including assistive technology devices and services where necessary to afford individuals with disabilities an equal opportunity to participate in and enjoy the benefits of the program or activity, and providing for the physical accessibility of the one-stop centers for all entrants, individuals with disabilities. We also know in the final rule calls for memorandums of understanding, MOUs, between the one-stop delivery system, local boards, and one-stop partners that, among other things, needs to include how costs are being shared, infrastructure costs are being shared for the one-stop centers, and what methods are being employed to ensure that the needs of workers, youth, and individuals with barriers to employment, including individuals with disabilities, are addressed in providing access to services, including access to technology and materials that are available through the one-stop delivery system. Another key component that much time has been spent since the law was passed is gaining an understanding and a greater appreciation for career pathways. Career pathways, states are required in their state plans to include a description of strategy and how it will be integrated across core programs. It is also, what's clear is that the creation of career pathways also involves youth participating in Title I programs which individuals with disabilities are eligible for. All youth participating in Title I programs must be highly involved himself or herself in the design and implementation of career pathway services that will best meet their individual needs. Coordination of youth services includes an understanding of eligibility around income level, and it's important to understand that eligibility for youth with disabilities does not include family income. So youth with disabilities are going to more likely to be eligible than other youth without disabilities, where family income does come into the eligibility question. Individual with a disability whose own income meets the low income definition, income that does not exceed the higher of the poverty line or 70% of the lower living standard income level, but who is a member of a family whose income exceeds this income requirement, will still be eligible for youth services. Only in-school youth with a disability must be low income. Out-of-school youth with a disability are not required to be low income. Local boards must ensure that there are appropriate linkages to entities that will foster the participation of eligible local area youth. That includes local disability provider agencies and other health and mental health providers. Coordination is also a key tenet of the adult service delivery system, and there must be coordination between employment and training activities and programs carried out in the local area for individuals with disabilities. And explicitly mentioned is reaching out to and including at a state level, statewide independent living councils, and at an area level, centers for independent living. A final area to go over in this brief set of highlights of the final rules in Title I is that there is the inclusion of a definition of financial literacy, which must be considered as part of individualized career services and must be made available if determined to be appropriate in order for a youth or an adult to obtain or retain employment. In the final rule, an additional element of the definition of financial literacy was added specific to the needs of youth with disabilities. And so now the definition includes connecting youth with disabilities to benefits planning and work incentives counseling. So, went over all of that very rapidly. And I must say there is so much more that can be said. And hopefully through the conversations and the presentations you're about to hear, we'll touch on many more areas of focus of the final rule in Title I. Before I turn to our panelists, I did want to leave you with one set of opportunities in terms of next step thinking. You may have many other ideas based on the panel and based on the question and answer part of this webinar. But for right now, I hope all of you, regardless of whether you're a workforce development professional, you could be a staff member in an independent living center, whether you're an education provider, regardless of how you might want to identify yourself, I think these are 5 areas to think about in terms of WIOA from a disabilities perspective. Regardless of what state you're in, you want to take the time and review your final approved state plan. You want to bring that down to a local area, if that's where you work, and look at, and I hope may have participated in the development of your local area plan. I hope you take very seriously this issue and importance of cross-system collaboration, and for people with disabilities, WIOA emphasizes cross-system collaboration, that you can explore how can we make this better, both at a state level and a local level, particularly Title I workforce, vocational rehabilitation, working with Medicaid, education, mental health, intellectual and developmental disability systems, and adult education systems. What's the structure? What's the process? How do we draw these different agencies together to better meet the needs of youth and adults with disabilities? I hope you consider becoming more involved in the state and local workforce development board process. At the state level, they'll be developing the standards for program and physical accessibility of AJCs. At a local level, they'll be reviewing the accessibility and evaluating whether and what needs to be improved so that eventually they receive certification. Number 4, I hope you look at what can be done to better coordinate resources to advance inclusive career pathways so that youth, young adults, working age adults with disabilities are not left behind from the extraordinary opportunities for gaining credentials, certifications, whether it's community college or other education and training providers. And number 5, I hope you look seriously at the opportunities to involve multiple community partners and potential collaborators. How can we offer financial literacy education so that individuals with and without disabilities have the opportunity not only to achieve and find their personal career pathway, but better able to manage money and credit and debt and think about financial goals which lift people from a lower economic class or a lower rung of the economic ladder and move on up in terms of economic mobility and stability and security. So just some things to think about. We wanted to share with you there are a lot of resources. These are just a few, and our panelists will share more. The link to the WIOA final rule, the performance accountability resource available, more information about performance reporting, the lead center summary description from a disability perspective of final rule implementing Title I of WIOA, which can be found on the lead center website. We also have a summary description of the final rule implementing Title IV of WIOA, which is Title I of the Rehabilitation Act. A terrific resource, if you're not familiar with it, is the Workforce GPS Disability and Employment Community of Practice, where you can find a whole lot of resources that could help you, and a discussion forum on disability and workforce. And a brand new resource and an exciting one that came out just this week is a new blog, A Call to Action. Make disability visible in everything we do. This was a blog jointly authored from the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, from the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, from the Employment and Training Administration, and from the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and came out and tried to certainly leverage the 26th anniversary of the ADA earlier in the week, and really asked some very important questions for all of us to think about how we create a welcoming environment for people not just with visible but also hidden disabilities. How can WIOA core partners work better together to make sure that all facets of the workforce development system within and outside AJCs are more accessible? How can we look at core partners using the data, new data that's going to be collected about individuals with disabilities to develop more timely and customized interventions? And how can these many different funding sources across mandated partners improve effective service delivery and support so that people with disabilities can succeed with their employment goals? So these are great questions. There are some resources within that blog, and we wanted to, again, highlight and identify that for you as a resource as well. So let me move on to our panelists. And I first, to give brief words of introduction, I want to turn to Christopher Button with ODEP, Supervisor Workforce Systems Policy Team. This is the team that is looking across policy, structure, program, processes to bring down, reduce, eliminate barriers to increase competitive integrated employment and economic advancement for people with disabilities, but with special attention for people with more significant disabilities. So let me turn it over to Dr. Button. Chris?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you to the LEAD team for organizing this fabulous webinar today. I think I want to say just a couple of things. This is a really historic time for youth and adults with disabilities within the context of the rollout of WIOA. It's really an exciting time to be inside the federal government as we look at the increased focus on partnership and collaboration. I think we see that reflected really in today's webinar, because when we reached out to Kim at ETA, to Heidi, to Sue, and to our other panelists, there was an immediate, of course, we want to participate. Everyone is really going the extra mile to make sure that as multiple cross-agency teams are working hard initially on the regs, and then there will be guidance and there will be technical assistance. All of these conversations are happening, and disability is very much a part of those conversations. So it's just a very historic and exciting time, and ODEP has the honor, really, of being part of all of those conversations, particularly here at the Department of Labor. The Employment and Training Administration has just been phenomenal in making sure that various ODEP staff are a part of the team activities, and we just, we're really excited about what this law holds in terms of the future for really transforming the employment services and the workforce development system for youth and adults with disabilities. So turn it back to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me turn next to Kim Vitelli, Deputy Administrator at the Employment and Training Administration's Office of Workforce Investment. That is the office that oversees formula and competitive grant programs that help people get jobs, keep jobs, and get better jobs. And Kim has been a key part of the development of these final rules, as well as looking at catalyzing program partnerships and integration. So Kim, let me turn to you.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you for inviting me. Let me just add a few things about our final rules. This is the technocrat in me. Michael made a good point about adding to the slide that the rules were publicly available. And for those of you who aren't familiar with sort of the natural development of how regs get shared and published, we've made the regulations publicly available. So that means that people can start reading them now, but they're not formally published in the Federal Register, so they're not effective right now. The document itself is actually at the Federal Register. There's a building, and they're formatting them for printing. After they're published in the Federal Register, after the regulations are published in the Federal Register, the joint final rules and the DOL final rules will be effective 60 days after that publication. For the voc rehab rules and the adult education rules, they'll be effective 30 days after publication, although if I said that wrong for the education rules, I'll count on Heidi and Sue to correct me. Michael gave some highlights of the joint DOL only and voc rehab rule, and I also want to just sort of acknowledge that there's the adult education rule as well in this package of WIOA rules. All of our programs help individuals with disabilities get jobs and advance along career pathways. So Michael's highlights were really helpful of the final rule, and I like the term that he used about a disability perspective rather than rules that apply to disability or disability rules, because the WIOA regulations are for everyone, and we worked hard on the entire rule to make all of the programs work well for everyone, including people with barriers and special expertise for employment, including people with disabilities. Now, Michael gave some of the details. Let me sort of just talk a little bit about some of the strategies that come through in the regulations. One of those is, as Michael said, an emphasis on career pathways. So the rules really try to give states and local areas more tools to create and support career pathways. That includes more training options, easier access to pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship opportunities and other work-based learning, and clearer rules for coordination among programs so that people can get the education and training and the supportive services that they need. The rules also lay out clearer expectations for how the American Job Center Network relies on and supports businesses. And of course, these business relationships also support career pathways. Our rules now more clearly allow for some of the services that businesses find helpful, including customized training to meet a business's needs, incumbent worker training, and increased rates of on-the-job training reimbursement. The rules also include a pilot performance measure for how we're doing in serving businesses. In addition to helping individual businesses, the law and the rules also call for workforce boards to do regional planning and to develop sector strategies. I mean, these things all sort of tie together. The sector strategies support economic growth and provide the basis for the development of and support of career pathways. Now, we might have this law and these regulations in place for a generation, looking at sort of our experience and how often these rules, how often the law gets reauthorized. So it's a good thing that there's a lot of room to grow in this statute and the rules. We've mentioned the accessibility piece of the American Job Center certification requirements. There's other parts of the certification requirements too, including continuous improvement and effectiveness in serving businesses and job seeker customers. So it's actually, I think, pretty key that continuous improvement is built into our concept of how the workforce system and the education system are going to grow over time. There's also a clear call for evaluation and requirements on how to do data-based decision-making and to continually use evaluations to build an evidence base about what works and then to make data-driven decisions based on what we know about what works. So as I'm trying to sort of get across, we're trying to keep at least one eye on the big picture about what we're trying to accomplish in WIOA, as well as one eye on the implementation details that we need to be paying attention to so that we can reach those and accomplish those strategies. Now, there's a lot to digest in these rules, and so I want to point out where we've put together some materials to help digest and understand and explore the regulations and the law. One of them is up on your screen right now at doleta.gov/WIOA. You can find on that page links to the final rules as well as the information collection requests. And those information collection requests are basically the kinds of data collection requirements that we have for performance reporting, as well as you can also find fact sheets and a reader's guide to the rule and frequently asked questions. There's also, and you can probably see it on the screen, a nice little video from the secretaries about the importance of WIOA that actually I thought was really fun to watch. It's a really good grounding about what this means. This isn't just about signing an MOU, but like what we're trying to accomplish by all these different MOUs and performance metrics. Another resource, if you can switch to the next slide, another resource that Michael did mention was workforcegps.org. This is ETA's technical assistance platform. It includes communities of practice and resources on some topics, including career pathways. It's got some good resources on sector strategies and business services, the disability and employment community of practice, labor market information has a community of practice, and we have a community of practice, you can go to the next slide, on WIOA implementation called ION, which stands for the Innovation and Opportunity Network. So this is the location for all of our joint technical assistance that education and labor, as well as HHS, have all been jointly developing some technical assistance materials and will be producing some more technical assistance materials moving forward on the joint rule. You'll be able to find them here. And also we try to be intentional about making sure that we're cross-posting across education and labor and HHS resources that all of our relevant stakeholder groups and grantees would be interested in. So this is the ION is the home for peer learning groups, a webinar series that will be rolling out, one of which started on July 19th. Next joint rule one is on, I want to say September 21st, on infrastructure cost funding. But this is where you'll go to find those. And we still have resources, in fact, from this isn't, WIOA is not brand new. From our earlier phases of WIOA implementation, those technical assistance resources are on this page as well, including things like the WIOA 101 and our Quick Start action planners and some other technical assistance materials. And lastly, we've got, I mentioned earlier, the Disability and Employment Community of Practice. I just wanted to show you what that looked like so when you found it, you knew you were in the right place. We've got a lot of resources here related to WIOA, but it's not just WIOA. I think you can even see right here on the screen, we've got some resources on that page about the ticket to work. So don't feel limited in just looking at ION. Feel free to poke around all of Workforce GPS and all of the sites as well that Education and HHS host as well. We try to be intentional about cross-posting resources, but you'll want to be familiar with all of the technical assistance and guidance that all of our agencies are putting out. So let me pause there, and I think there's time for questions at the end, and I'm going to pass it on now to my colleague at Education, Sue Rankin-White at the Rehabilitation Services Administration. Or maybe I'm handing it over to Michael first before I hand it over to them.
Either way, Kim. Thank you. Let's turn next to Sue Rankin, who is Program Advisor to the Commissioner at RSA in the Department of Education. And Sue brings a career that spans over 30 years at a local, state, and national level, and is well-recognized and dedicated disability rights advocate. Sue, let me turn to you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Kim. Likewise, I'm glad to be with you this afternoon. And as we look at Title I of WIOA from a disability perspective today, we know, as it's been mentioned already several times, that individuals with disabilities, including students and youth with disabilities, are among those with significant barriers to employment impacted by the Title I provisions. For example, as we've talked about the American Job Centers, the one-stops, individuals with disabilities use these centers every day. Therefore, it's paramount that they be fully accessible for all users, including those with disabilities, and that means physical and program accessibility. We know that the value of work-based learning for all job seekers, including those with disabilities. And this is especially true for students and youth with disabilities who have limited work experience. And we know that the WIOA focuses on employer engagement to help provide those work-based learning, and that will equip these job seekers to be better prepared to enter the competitive labor market. We know that individuals with disabilities can also benefit from this outreach to employers as we look at specific sector strategies and developing new career pathways. So these are just a few of the ways that Title I impacts people with disabilities, and we'll talk about these more later in the presentation. But before we move on, I wanted to take this opportunity to remind you that Title IV of WIOA is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it addresses the title-specific requirements related to individuals with disabilities. And those requirements are for the Vocational Rehabilitation Services Program, the Supported Employment Services Program, and the new provisions on the use of subminimum wages that are under the purview of the Department of Education. These provisions for these title-specific programs further strengthen opportunities for individuals with disabilities to acquire the skills and supports necessary to maximize their potential and enter competitive integrated employment, which is a fundamental principle in Title IV. These programs are administered by the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services Administration within the Department of Education. And now let's turn our attention, if you will, to to our resource slides, and similar to what Kim pointed out to you in her slides, we do intentionally cross-post so that you can go to any of our websites and find information. And so here in this slide, you will see the RSA website, rsa.ed.gov, and here you can see all about WIOA and the resources there. You can see an overview, the noteworthy final rules. That's a heading there. A workforce success story, which I think you would find very interesting, and information about the WIOA second anniversary. And you'll also see there information about our technical assistance centers that we fund, and information about our upcoming series of regional technical assistance training meetings that we're holding. And the first one of those, just to call your attention, the first one of those we're set to launch on August 9th in Washington, and these meetings are focused on the Title IV provisions, the program specific. As you know, as you're aware, we had so many changes in the Rehabilitation Act related to the VR and supported employment programs, not to mention the new rules related to subminimum wage, that it will take us all of our training day to be able to go over just some of the basic changes and implementation issues related to those. So I hope that you have registered and will be in attendance at one of these meetings. We do have online registration, which is explained here in the website, and the areas that we're covering in our training include competitive integrated employment, employment outcome, subminimum wage, supported employment, and physical requirements, and pre-employment transition services. Another resource that I'll call your attention to is the National Clearinghouse of Rehabilitation Materials. And you can go here to find all information related to a host of rehabilitation issues. Just to let you know, though, this website is being revised, and the Clearinghouse hopes to have a new version of its website available in the first week of August, which would be next week. This website, the updated website, will include TA resources. It will include our RSA webinars, training events, dedicated comprehensive information on our technical assistance centers, and it will also have a dedicated Twitter news feed that will display the most recent announcements about TA resources and training activities and technical assistance center learning events and communities of practice. So I would recommend this as a valuable resource for you to tune into. Another resource that we have is I'll just call your attention to one of our specific technical assistance centers. In RSA, we funded 7 new technical assistance centers, and one of these deals directly with WIOA. It's dedicated to that. It's a national center, and it provides technical assistance to state vocational rehabilitation agencies and other rehabilitation professionals to help them develop the skills and processes needed to meet the requirements of WIOA. And here you can find information about, it's called the WINTAC, Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center. And the 5 areas of concentration for the WINTAC are pre-employment transition services, implementation of Section 511 requirements, resources and strategies for competitive integrated employment, integration of VR into the workforce development system, and transition to the Common Performance Accountability System under WIOA. I don't have a slide for this next resource. I failed to put it in, but it is another a technical assistance center that I want to call to your attention. We do have a dedicated technical assistance center for youth with disabilities, and that is our VR TAC for youth. And that technical assistance center, again, provides technical assistance to VR agencies to assist them to improve services to and outcomes for students and youth with disabilities as they are defined in the Rehabilitation Act. So those are a few of the things I wanted to point out to you, and now I'll turn back to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. And let me quickly turn to Heidi Silver. I may mispronounce your last name, Pecula? Heidi is the branch chief for Applied Innovation and Improvement in the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, or better known as OCTE. And Heidi, why don't you take it away?
Thank you so much. Thank you for involving us this afternoon. Very happy to be here. Go ahead to the next slide. I'm here representing the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. We are Title II of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and our act is the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, and we've had that title for many years. Our purpose under WIOA was expanded, and of course we have new partners here on the phone with us today. This is our homepage where you can find us. We are at www.ed.gov/OCTAE, O-C-T-A-E, and there is a dedicated page to our WIOA resources that you can see there in the navigation. Go ahead to the next page. I want to tell you just a little bit about who we serve. We serve youth and adults above compulsory school age, which is 16 in many states, but some states have raised that. So above compulsory school age, who are basic skills deficient, needing a high school completion, whether that's a diploma or a GED or one of the other assessment tests, or who need English proficiency. So I wanted to show you this infographic, which is on our facts and figures page if you're interested. We have one of these for each state, actually. And this really shows the vast need in our country for adults who need to complete their high school credential. A lot of research has come out recently showing just how hard adults with only a high school credential and those certainly without were hit by the recent recession and not recovering jobs in the recovery. So making sure that WIOA services do focus on getting youth and adults credentials that will take them farther and take them along those career pathways is a really important part of the law. This shows that there's about 12% of the U.S. population without a high school credential, and it shows the need for English language learning. And I wanted to just bring to your attention that there are many English language learners in our programs and in your communities who already have credentials. They have a high school credential or more. We call these high-skilled immigrants. There are many people here, if you take taxis, who are driving taxis, but they have their PhDs from their home country and are unable to translate those skills into the American job market. This is an area that we are focusing on more and more in our programs, trying to get those folks back into the labor market. In program year 2014-2015, the Title II program served 1.5 million adults and youth, and we have programs in every state administered as CBOs, community-based organizations, or through community colleges, or through the state education system. So great variety. We serve program areas for basic education, sort of below a secondary level of education. We do the adult secondary, of course, try and get folks get their high school credential, and also ESL. And just to let you know, last year, ESL learners were 44% of our population. So that is just a really large and growing area for us. And as I said, these infographics that look like this are produced for each state, and they are on our facts and figures page. So we are Title II. We're adult education. People come to us with many goals, and happily, many people change their goals and expand their horizons while they're with us and while they start to get re-engaged with education. So we're really just the front door and hope to connect people to many new opportunities. So joining with our WIOA partners is a wonderful development for adult education. Michael mentioned financial literacy early on, and I wanted to let you know about some resources that we have that may be useful if you are interested in pursuing that financial literacy component of WIOA. So go ahead to the next slide, please. A large part of what we do with our national activities dollars is to produce professional development and technical assistance for our practitioners and our programs. Many of our practitioners, whether they're teachers or administrators, are part-time in our programs, which means it's difficult to get training to them. And so we are putting more and more opportunities to learn online in a self-access way. And this particular resource, which is links, lincs.ed.gov, I'll put it in the chat when I finish speaking. Links is our central hub for technical assistance and professional development resources. You can see that there are online courses that you can access there on the left. There is an online community of practice, which I'll speak about. It's the center button. And there's a resource collection that's on the right with vetted and curated resources. One of the areas in the resource collection is financial literacy. So you'd find many resources under that category. Go on to the next slide. In the community of practice, there are 16 topical groups. This is all available for free, of course, just with a registration, although you can poke around and what's called lurk. You can lurk around without registering. So you could test the water a little bit and see what's going on in these groups and see if there's something you'd like to join. We have over 10,000 members. Most of them are in adult education, but there are researchers and practitioners from other areas as well. And one of the groups is financial literacy. So go on to the next. And I encourage you to look at the financial literacy group, see the kinds of discussions that we've hosted in the past. This is a great place. There are 800 new friends there for you, where you could post a question or put up a link to your resource if you are already teaching this content. This is where we would send our practitioners if they wanted to know how do you teach financial literacy to youth or adults. Lots of good conversations going on here, good resources being shared, and a lot of resources are reviewed and in the collection that I talked about at the beginning. Our professional development resources are there for you and for all of us, so we encourage you to use them. And we may want to join together with you and come up with a new conversation and a new guest discussion. If this is interesting to you, go ahead and put it in the chat box about financial literacy being taught in the one-stops or however else we want to direct that conversation. this peer group, it has a moderator, but we can also bring in guest speakers. So looking to boost the participation in this group and make it work for all of us in WIOA. So thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Michael.
Thank you. Let me quickly turn to Julie Squire, Policy Director at NASWA, National Association of State Workforce Agencies. Julie, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my privilege to work with the National Association of State Workforce Agencies, supporting the states to accomplish their workforce goals and their statutory roles and responsibilities. In this portion of the webinar, I'm just going to briefly touch on a few key areas the states are working on under WIOA that involve individuals with disabilities. Our members are the state agencies that work with the federal workforce programs, and that includes WIOA, unemployment insurance, labor market information, employment services, and the Jobs for State Veterans grant programs. As we work with our members to improve the workforce development system, we focus on the areas in this wheel on this slide, and all of these policy areas involve programs that in some way provide services to individuals, including those with disabilities. So the TextCloud program I use has a word limit, so I couldn't download all of the new regulations, but I did think it would be fun, so I downloaded the Department of Labor portion of the joint rule, which is 20 CFR Parts 676, 677, and 678. And I was not disappointed because state is one of the most frequent words. And states are important under WIOA, and I'm just going to highlight 3 of the many roles that the states have. So the first role is as a direct provider of services in the one-stops. And a lot of times people don't realize that states often provide direct services. All states provide direct services in unemployment insurance, and many do in employment services under the Wagner-Pizer Act and the Jobs for Veterans state grant. And states are working right now to make sure their programs are consistent with the WIOA regulations, including the regulations involving individuals with disabilities. All partner programs in the one-stop must be part of a written Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, that addresses a number of elements, including how they will ensure access to individuals with disabilities. And now that the regulations have been shared, states and other partners will be working on these one-stop MOUs. The MOU is important because the State Workforce Board must certify the one-stops, and they look at a number of factors, and those are all listed under 20 CFR section 678.8, and these include criteria based on ensuring access to individuals with disabilities, such as providing reasonable accommodations and physical access. The second key role of the states I'm going to talk about under WIOA is that states must propose and monitor program performance of all Title I grant recipients. This is the area where we here at NASWA see a strong demand for technical assistance, and in response to that, we have a performance work group for our members through our Employment and Training Committee. There we go. I think I missed a couple, sorry. So in addition, let's see, I talked about, in addition to the role of states as the service provider and as the role of performance, there we go. There's also a very critical role to ensure equal opportunity and access under Title I. So the states monitor grant recipients to make sure there's compliance with all the accessibility provisions, and this work includes data analysis, investigation of complaints, and the, making sure that recipients are in compliance with those non-discrimination provisions of WIOA. And NASWA has an Equal Opportunity Committee that supports our members with this oversight role. And related to this oversight role, there are more regulations coming soon, and Michael touched on this at the earlier part of the webinar. And these are the WIOA non-discrimination regulations, and they will be coming out soon from the Department of Labor's Civil Rights Center. They were treated separately and were not in this batch. We are going to be watching for these, and in the meantime, the current non-discrimination regulations are at 29 CFR Part 38. And if you would like to find out more information about NASWA, I would encourage you to visit our website, and we're at www.naswa.org, or you can contact me directly. Our website includes a WIOA tab that has many WIOA resources. And I want to thank you all, and this concludes my portion of the webinar. Michael?
Thank you, Julie. And let me quickly turn to Bridget Brown with National Association of Workforce Development Professionals. Bridget and her organization are a major collaborator in the LEAD Center. Bridget, just some brief comments.
Thank you, Michael. And I didn't put together any slides for this presentation because I knew that the speakers who went before me were going to do a wonderful job in covering a lot of the information that's in the regulations, that's in the law, and what to be looking for in the future. So when I was thinking about what my comments would be on, I really wanted to go back to who is at the heart of NAWDP. And NAWDP, as most of you may know, we represent the breadth of workforce development, everything from frontline staff at American Job Centers to state officials, some federal officials. It's not necessarily dependent on what particular funding source or where someone is located. But for purposes of this, I really want to dig down in and give you a view on what we're hearing from the individuals who are really on the front lines, that service delivery type of professional. And NAWDP, quite honestly, has been doing a lot more listening than we have talking around this issue, because what we wanted to do was to hear the concerns that our staffs are having, that's bubbling to the surface now, and to see what can be done collaboratively or independently to address some of those concerns. So a couple of ones that I wanted to highlight, just so that everybody's aware of them. Some of the concerns that we're hearing is, what happens when a job seeker customer doesn't self-disclose that they might have a disability? Because I know that a lot of our frontline staff are concerned that they're not going to adequately address the needs. One of the things that NAWDP has been doing is even just raising the awareness. If you aren't aware of something, you're not going to see it when it's right in front of you. So we've been actively working with our membership to make sure that there's training, that we're even taking a look at how do you arrange your center. It's one thing if someone can get into your center, i.e. ADA compliant, but they also have to move around once they're in there. So looking at the way that your customers even queue up. We're hearing some concerns about lack of knowledge around limits for individuals who might be on SSI. Our case managers are concerned about pointing them in a direction where they might lose benefits and end up in the negative. So we've been doing a lot of information sharing around what are the SSI rules and regulations, and how do we make sure that our workforce professionals understand them, so that they can adequately discuss that with their partners over vocational rehabilitation or individually with the clients. We're hearing some concerns that some of the customers who might be coming through our doors might have issues that are too significant for the traditional workforce center to handle. And I have to say, this is where the LEAD Center, Rebecca Salon and others have been just really marvelous in helping us identify community partners, folks that we can help bring to the table to supplement what America's Job Centers cannot provide, but are absolutely necessary for the success, whether it is supportive services or transportation, whatever it might be, but taking a broader look at what is already in the community doing great work that can supplement and support what is being done in the workforce centers. Of course, the one that we haven't quite managed to get over yet, And, you know, at the end of the day, we are a system of human beings who are working with other human beings. So the number one concern that we hear is, oh my goodness, I am just so scared that I am going to say or do something that is completely and totally insensitive. And we know, we've all heard stories where that may have happened, not to anyone who's on this webinar, I'm sure, but may have happened in the past. So even the issue around sensitivity training, what is the correct terminology to be utilizing? And at NAWDP, we're going through our own internal documents to make sure that if we say you should call this a particular term, we're using it in our own language. So we're trying to reinforce a lot of that sensitivity around serving whomever comes through our doors. The great thing about this is that when you think through these strategies and when you really move towards a customer-centric or a human-centric model at any workforce organization, you're benefiting all of your customers. So the issue of individuals or more individuals who might have a disability coming through your door becomes a moot point because you already have processes in place where you're serving everyone with dignity and providing the right tools for them, whether it's utilizing assistive technology or just treating them with respect and a human-centric focus. So what we've really been doing is addressing some of the emotional concerns that may bubble up to the top. You know, we're all concerned, and we all want to make sure that we are treating all of our customers effectively. You know, at the end of the day, it is the local employers who will make the decision whether or not they will hire an individual or not. So we're even working with the part of the system that works directly with our local businesses and employers and changing the conversation where they go out to market, for lack of a better term, the talent that we have within our system and really focusing on that strength-based approach which will sell an employer on hiring anyone who's qualified regardless of whether or not there is a reasonable accommodation that needs to be made. In most cases, when you really stress the skills, reasonable accommodation does not become an issue. So that's a lot of what we're seeing and hearing from that service delivery perspective. And obviously, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. But I think we're very hopeful that the collaboration across the different parts of the system, the adult education, the vocational rehab, all of that working together, we're going to make sure that that safety net is in place for all of our customers.
Thank you, Bridget. And I'm going to quickly jump us right into some questions with the time we have left. I'm going to start with Kim. And clearly, as in what Bridget just said, this is all about collaboration, mandated partners and beyond. Can you suggest to our listeners, how is Department of Labor and Department of Education going to work together to try to evaluate, are we seeing sufficient level or effective cross-system collaboration? How will you look at that in the future?
Sure. I think this is something that we all have to be mindful of in the months and years really ahead. This is a long-term effort. There is a level of responsibility at the federal level for us to be on the lookout for that and measuring and watching for it in the system. And I think that it's on all of us that are listening at the state and local levels to also feel responsibility to sort of regularly be taking the temperature of like the health of our partnerships. But just to answer the question you were asking about what we're thinking about at the federal level, I think, you know, some of it is wrapped up in acknowledging and looking at and watching the success of state workforce development boards, which is where multiple programs come and stakeholders and customers of the system, including businesses, come together. And so by the nature and of how they operate, boards operate transparently under the sunshine provisions of WIOA. All of us can be sort of observing who is attending the meetings, what kinds of things are getting discussed at meetings, the sort of health and vitality and robustness of the subcommittees and the true engagement of the partners that are present on, and I say that I mean all the board members, the engagement of board members in the board, those are volunteers, and a board that is really dynamic and robust has healthy interaction from all board members. It's just a hard thing to achieve. So looking at how boards are operating is one thing I think that we can look at for cross-system collaboration. Also, obviously, the state plans are evidence of how states are working together and how there's not like a certain number of modifications that we would expect every year, but plans that truly reflect what's happening on the ground are a good indication of cross-system collaboration. And not just the plans, but also the policies that are established. The state board has responsibility for establishing some of those policies, and of course the state agencies and will also be establishing their own policies. But that's a thing to look at and to watch to see how things are going for cross-system collaboration. And as the feds, we have a responsibility to monitor. In this transition year, we've actually been using that term now since the bill passed. We've been in like different phases of the transition. But of course, the first year of the regulations is also a transition year. We'll be on the ground watching and trying to provide assistance to notice where things are going well and where we need to give more guidance or provide support to get states on the right path and to help states do the things that they do well. And that monitoring and technical assistance is stuff that we're trying to do across the federal partners to try to coordinate on that so that we're doing the monitoring together and that we're sort of digesting the lessons from that monitoring together as well. I don't know if my federal colleagues want to add anything to that.
Well, let me go to Sue, but in very much a related question is how can youth programs, we have youth under Title I, obviously students with disabilities in Title IV and the vocational rehabilitation part, but how can you link the two together? And a question we get asked so often, whether it's a youth or adult with a disability, they can be served by vocational rehabilitation and the Title I system at the same time. Can you provide some thoughts about that?
Sure. And you're right, they can be, and one of the ways that definitely has to occur in most effectively is through our collaboration and partnership between Title IV and Title I, the service providers. But one example of cross-collaboration there would be where a youth who is a VR consumer seeking self-employment might partner with WIOA youth programs with regard to the entrepreneurial skills, which are part of the services under the Title I programs, and both agencies can be providing some of the labor market information and workforce preparation activities, and they can partner together to decide how to do the entrepreneurial skills. And another example would be to partner together on coordinating work-based learning experiences, such as summer and year-round employment and pre-apprenticeships and on-the-job training or internships or job shadowing. I think that would be a perfect way for the two to work together. So while both programs can work together, serving the student with a disability and link together, they can refer to each other for the program that's got perhaps the services that would be most appropriate for the individual. So in that regard, it's going to be paramount that that Title IV and Title I know about each other's programs, so they will know where most effectively that individual can be served. So those are a couple of specific areas that I think that we could talk about pre-employment transition services, for example, provided by Title IV, provided under the Title IV, the VR program under Title I of Title IV, might be an area where Title I programs would refer over. So I see sort of a jointly working together and jointly referring back and forth.
Great, thank you. And let me quickly turn to Heidi. And you helped us understand a little bit more about adult and technical education. Could you make suggestions to our audience of how can we increase inclusive adult and technical education opportunities for individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you. And I didn't cover CTE very well, Career and Technical Education, which is a significant part of our office. CTE, of course, is in the secondary schools, but it's also post-secondary, and it's governed by the Carl D. Perkins legislation. Now, some states did put Perkins in as a partner in their plan, but whether Perkins is in the plan or not, coordination with the post-secondary career and technical education providers is still a must for local plans, and as career and technical post-secondary providers are a required partner in one-stop systems and need to contribute to the career services. And a few of the comments in the Q&A touch on this too. The skills that individuals learn in career and technical education are so valuable, and they feed right into what Sue was just talking about, the work-based learning, pre-apprenticeship, all of the skills that will really serve someone well on the job and get them ready to fit in and succeed in their jobs or to advance in their jobs. And this is really CTE's moment. CTE is up for reauthorization, the Carl D. Perkins legislation. So we think this is a very important part of WIOA. We're delighted to see it as part of the one-stop delivery system, and consider the career and technical providers that are now part of the workforce system as absolutely critical to the success of the adults and youth accessing services at the one-stop.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to Julie with NASWA. You explained to those who are unfamiliar, NASWA represents the state workforce agencies. So at this point in implementation of WIOA, what are you hearing from the states as far as what they think their critical technical assistance needs are to make sure WIOA is most effective in serving and supporting individuals with disabilities?
Well, there are a number of areas. I think one of the most critical one that we're working with the states on now, which is a tough one, is data integration, because WIOA requires different programs and entities to share data, especially for purposes of performance measurement. So we just started last year a technology committee, and that group has been working, and they just released, and it's on our website, a WIOA Workforce Technology Data Systems Report. And we're really looking to share successful and best practices as WIOA is implemented under the new regs with the new performance templates, to have states help states in this area. So that's really a major challenge that we're working on right now.
Thank you. Let me go to Bridget, and maybe a similar question, although I think you answered it somewhat in your earlier comments. For workforce professionals, in addition to, you said, being sure they're being sensitive and appropriate communication with youth and adults with disabilities, could you identify, if you were to identify another area with new law beginning to be implemented, what would that be? In terms of challenges for workforce professionals?
I think they're really looking for data on specific interventions that work, not necessarily that are a checklist, but that we know absolutely work. And I think that many times we try to do a 1-hour seminar or a 2-hour seminar, and I think what they need is in-depth training. They really want to do the right thing. But what they need to understand is what works with different populations, what's been proven to work, and also they just need to have the big picture. I think that, you know, one of the things I think is going to be key, and Julie just touched on it, is the data issue. And how are they capturing that? And what do the data points mean so that they can utilize that data for continuous improvement? We always tell our members, yes, you need to collect data, you need to provide it to your funders, whether it's Department of Education or Department of Labor or whomever it might be, but there's also other data points you need to collect for your own internal use, and know that each data point is attached to a person, and what does that mean to improve it, and how can you make sure that that absolute discipline, that obsession with metrics comes from the front line all the way through in an ethical way, all the way to the top. So if you're doing the right things for your customers, your performance metrics should work themselves out, but we really do need more in-depth training around different ways to work with local employers and also the different supportive services that are out there in the community that can help build up what the workforce centers are already doing.
Yes, thank you. And let me go quickly to Kim. Another core area we've talked about today is career pathways. There is some concern in the disability community that somehow they're going to be left in the back of the line in terms of having the same equal opportunity to receiving training dollars and being a part of career pathway training through community colleges and other providers. Any suggestions on how do we ensure that inclusive career pathways is a prominent part of the design and rollout?
Sure. You know, whenever we talk about career pathways, and by we I mean actually all of our agencies, Ed and Labor and HHS as well, we talk about 6 core elements of success in building and sustaining career pathways, and the first one is building cross-agency partnerships, and that's the one that I think is really key here, that everybody be able to feel shared ownership of career pathways and be able to jointly help influence and shape and sustain career pathways over time. All of our programs that bring something to the table. All of the programs that are represented here, as well as our partner programs out in the world, bring something to the table to help develop and shape and sustain both the career pathways and the people moving through those programs. And so I think making sure that agencies at the state and local level are reaching out to each other to share information about what they can bring and understanding each other's programs so that those programs can knit together to support people in career pathways is really important. All of our programs are able to add something such as relationships with businesses and expertise in career counseling and job placement assistance and job supports. There are people from different programs that might have a strength in having employer relationships that could be augmented by somebody who's very accustomed to and brings a lot of resources to the table and supporting job seekers once they're placed in the job. And I think when, you know, a key part of building career pathways is doing that sort of resource mapping. And so bringing that together right at the front end is a really important part of and is built into the design of how you build a career pathway. I would share that we've published a career pathways toolkit that includes some sort of big picture things to keep in mind, but also some very practical resources about how to have those conversations and how to do this sort of cross partner outreach at the start as you're beginning a career pathway and as you're adjusting it down the line that all of us would benefit from reading from. And those are available actually at all of our websites, but with my ETA hat on, it said Workforce GPS, and we have a Career Pathways community of practice that people can pull that stuff down for and start using those.
Great, thank you. And a question came in the chat box while you were talking that I think relates to that. I'm sure we have many nonprofit community service organizations that serve individuals with disabilities. Want to know how can they get more engaged with their local workforce development board and with their American Job Center operators. I'll stay with you for a second, Kim. Any thoughts about that?
Well, there's lots of different, there's a couple different ways. I would say, for starters, making sure to reach out to and be familiar with the operations of the local board so that you know how the local board is operating and who is on that board so that you can make those connections. And in addition, you can cold call an American Job Center. If you're looking for how to just find an American Job Center, contact information for all the job centers is at www.servicelocator.org. And you know, one of the things that we're trying to do here at the department, jointly ETA and ODEP, and also in partnership with other agencies as well, is to try to help different types of organizations understand each other's systems. We've been working to try to educate the Centers for Independent Living about the strengths of the workforce system, and we're going to be putting information out to the workforce system not that long from now about what, for instance, Centers for Independent Living do and how they can sort of support the work of the workforce system.
Thank you, Kim. We've gone over our time. So many more questions to ask. We will walk through the chat box, see if we can find questions. Probably send some of these back to our panelists so that we can get their thoughts. Maybe as just a final thoughts, maybe across the panel, and play the game out and challenge you. 7 words or less. What do you want to leave this audience with? I'm going to make it tough. Start with you, Bridget.
Oh, okay. Start with me. I would say that this is a great opportunity and something we should, more than 7 words. This is a great opportunity and something we need to do.
Okay, thank you. And how about I go to Julie?
I would say read the regs. They're really well written and they're not that hard to read.
Okay, long but not hard to read. I agree. And when you think of the amount of effort reviewing all the comments that came in, fantastic. Okay, Sue, what do you think?
Be an informed consumer and be an informed provider and be an informed partner.
You did it. Excellent. Heidi?
Well, I'd say there's a lot of resources out there across agencies, and start to share. Find good things and share what's working.
Excellent. And Kim?
I would say we're not starting from scratch. We're just continuing to do well what we've done in other corners of our business, use existing guidance. There's good guidance that we've put out on 188 compliance about accessibility that is useful. There's guidance about career pathways and sector strategies and youth transition. So use all of the tools in addition to the regulation.
And Christopher?
Yeah, I think in addition to what all the panelists have said, I would refer back to the 5 key areas for next step thinking, Michael, that you put out at the very beginning of the webinar. In particular, things like look at your state plan, which lays out kind of what your state is going to be doing, and get involved. State plans aren't written in stone. If you feel there are additional things that you would like them to consider, then, talk to them, get involved, explore, your local American Job Center, become a partner if you're one of the nonprofit agencies that we just had a question about. The systems can benefit from each other. And it's an exciting new time, as I think everyone has said across the board on the panel today. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll leave us with a final thought, and this is in the final rule in response to many commenters saying, we need more guidance at how exactly you want us to do career pathways. A wonderful response from the Department of Labor said, state and local workforce development boards should have, quote, flexibility to be proactive and innovative in developing career pathways. I think those three words, flexibility, proactive, innovative, I think those are words that really work for all of us. So thank you all. For so many of you, hundreds of you stayed with us. I know we went over the time. Thank you, panelists, for your insights and perspective, and we will try to look through additional questions to see if we can post on the Lead Center. All of this will be archived. Thank you so much, and do get involved, stay involved, and create wonderful pathways to advance employment and economic self-sufficiency for youth and adults with disabilities. Thank you so much for joining with us. Take care.